Owen shuffled across the polished floor of the Galactic combat arena, his flip-flops making an embarrassing slapping sound that echoed through the silence. The crowd of 12,000 alien spectators stared in what could only be described as confused horror. This wasn't what they'd expected when Earth finally accepted the invitation to the Grand Tournament of Champions. That's their warrior? Gorvak's 4 eyes narrowed as he leaned forward in the council viewing box. The massive Quillarian's chitinous plates clicked together in what passed for nervous laughter among his species. Their planet sends an elderly mammal wearing— what are those things on his feet? Thysa, commander of the elite Draken warrior caste, stood in the opposite corner of the arena. Her scales rippled with anticipation, and her razor-sharp claws extended and retracted in a rhythmic pattern that had intimidated opponents for over 2 centuries. She was bred for war, trained since hatching, and had never lost a single combat in her 298-year career. Owen pulled a paper bag from his pocket and unwrapped what appeared to be a sandwich. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and waved at the crowd with his free hand. "Is he eating?" Ambassador Kira whispered into her communication device from Earth's small observation booth. She'd tried to warn the council that sending their diplomatic combat representative might not go as expected, but they'd insisted on the traditional format. Single combat. Winner takes all. The losing species gets relegated to observer status for the next 50 galactic cycles. The arena's AI announcer, a crystalline entity named Nexal, began the pre-combat protocols. Its voice resonated through the massive dome in 17 different languages simultaneously. Citizens of the Galactic Alliance, today marks the 3,146th Grand Tournament. In the Crimson Corner, representing the Draken Empire, Commander Thysa Vel Thanor. Victory record, 847 wins, 0 defeats. Combat experience, 298 standard years. The crowd roared its approval. Thysa raised her arms, revealing battle scars that told stories of conquered worlds and defeated champions. Energy weapons had failed to penetrate her natural armor. Blade weapons had shattered against her scales. Projectile weapons simply bounced off. In the blue corner, representing the planet Earth, Owen. Nexal paused, clearly struggling with the human naming conventions. Owen Fletcher. Victory record, unknown. Combat experience, unknown. Age, 73, Earth years. The silence that followed was deafening. Owen finished his sandwich, crumpled the bag, and looked around for a trash receptacle. Finding none, he shrugged and stuffed it back in his pocket. His worn cargo shorts had seen better decades, and his faded t-shirt advertised something called Gary's Bait Shop in letters that were barely visible. 73 years, Gorvak's mandibles clicked in confusion. That's not even a full lifetime for most species. How can they send someone so temporary? Faye, the Earth xenobiologist who'd accompanied the diplomatic mission, smiled grimly from her seat next to Kira. They asked for our best combat specialist. Owen volunteered. But he's ancient by human standards, protested Kelthan, the Nexari representative whose species typically lived for 600 years. Why would they send someone at the end of their brief existence? Maybe you should ask him, Faye suggested. Down in the arena, Thysa had begun her traditional pre-combat ritual. She moved through a series of complex forms that demonstrated her mastery of 14 different martial disciplines. Each movement was precise, deadly, and designed to intimidate opponents before the actual fighting began. Owen watched with mild interest while stretching his back. He bent down to touch his toes, groaned slightly, and straightened up with the unmistakable crack of old joints settling into place. Combat protocols initialized, Nexal announced. Standard rules apply. No weapons beyond natural capabilities. Victory achieved through submission, incapacitation, or— The AI paused diplomatically. Permanent cessation of opponent function. Combatants, acknowledge readiness. Ready, Thysa hissed, her voice carrying the promise of swift and brutal victory. Owen raised his hand like he was asking a question in school. Quick question. When you say no weapons, does that include improvised items? Like, hypothetically, if someone were to use, say, a shoe? The arena fell silent. 12,000 aliens stared at the human who was apparently asking for permission to weaponize his footwear. Nexal consulted its combat database, a process that took nearly 3 seconds of quantum computation. Improvised weapons are Acceptable, provided they are not brought into the arena specifically for combat purposes. Great. Owen kicked off his flip-flops and picked them up, one in each hand. Just wanted to check. Thissa's confusion turned to something approaching insult. This wasn't just disrespectful to the sacred traditions of combat, it was bizarre beyond her comprehension. In nearly 3 centuries of warfare, she had never faced an opponent who appeared so utterly unprepared for violence. "Begin combat," Nexal announced. What happened next lasted exactly 14 seconds. Thyssa launched herself forward with the explosive speed that had made her legendary. Her claws extended to their full 8-inch length, capable of slicing through titanium alloy. She moved in a blur of scales and fury, closing the 40-foot distance between them in less than 2 seconds. Owen sidestepped. It wasn't a dramatic dodge or an athletic leap. He simply moved 3 steps to the right, like he was avoiding a puddle on the sidewalk. Thissa's claws carved deep gouges in the arena floor where he'd been standing a moment before. She spun, readjusted, and launched a second attack. This time she feinted left before striking right, a maneuver that had confused opponents for decades. Owen ducked under her claws, stepped forward, and casually swatted her across the snout with his left flip-flop. The sound was ridiculous, a soft thwap that somehow carried across the entire arena through the stunned silence. Thyssa staggered backward, more from shock than injury. No one had ever struck her with footwear before. The concept didn't exist in her combat training protocols. "Sorry," Owen said conversationally. "Reflex." She roared in fury and charged again, this time abandoning technique in favor of pure, overwhelming force. Every muscle in her body engaged simultaneously as she became a living missile of claws and teeth and armored scales. Owen waited until she was almost within reach, then dropped to one knee and drove his right flip-flop upward in a sharp, precise motion that connected with a soft spot just below her jaw. Thissa's momentum carried her forward, but her consciousness had already departed. She crashed to the arena floor with a sound like a cargo container falling off a loading dock. Owen stood up, brushed dust off his knee, and looked down at the unconscious alien warrior. Usually takes longer than that." He walked over to check her pulse, or whatever Draken had instead of a pulse, and nodded with satisfaction. "She'll be fine. Might have a headache when she wakes up." The arena remained silent. 12,000 aliens stared at the scene below, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Their greatest warrior, the undefeated champion of the Draken Empire, had been knocked unconscious by an elderly human wearing casual clothing and wielding footwear as weapons. "Combat concluded," Nexal announced, though its voice somehow conveyed the same stunned confusion that had gripped the audience. "Victory to Owen Fletcher of Earth." Owen put his flip-flops back on and retrieved his sandwich wrapper from his pocket, still looking for somewhere to dispose of it properly. He finally walked over to the arena's edge and handed it to a maintenance drone. "Thanks," he said to the drone, which had probably never been thanked for anything in its entire operational existence. In the council viewing box, Gorvak's 4 eyes had dilated to their maximum width. That wasn't possible. Thyssa has defeated opponents 3 times larger than that human. She's trained in combat techniques that predate most civilizations. She's survived direct hits from plasma cannons. And yet, Kelthon observed quietly, she was defeated by footwear. Owen looked up at the viewing box and waved. "Great arena, by the way. Really nice acoustics. You folks want to grab lunch or something? I know a great sandwich place back on Earth if anyone's interested in trying human food." The silence stretched on. Kira finally activated her communicator. "Owen, you need to come back up here. I think we need to have a diplomatic conversation." "Sure thing," Owen called back. He looked at Thyssa, who was beginning to stir. "Hey, you okay down there? Need some water or anything?" Thyssa opened her eyes, saw Owen standing over her with what appeared to be genuine concern, and promptly fainted again. "That happens sometimes," Owen explained to no one in particular. "Usually they come around after a few minutes." He walked toward the arena exit, his flip-flops slapping against the floor in a rhythm that would haunt alien nightmares for years to come. As he reached the doorway, Owen turned back to address the crowd. "By the way, if anyone's got questions about human combat techniques, I run a self-defense class every Thursday at the community center back home. Seniors get a discount." The exit doors closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving 12,000 aliens staring at an empty arena and trying to figure out what they'd just witnessed. In the medical bay, Thysa finally regained consciousness to find herself surrounded by the finest doctors in 3-star systems, all of whom were trying to figure out how someone could be knocked unconscious by rubber footwear without sustaining any serious injury. "How do you feel?" asked Dr. Wexter, a Nexari physician who'd been studying combat injuries for over 400 years. Thysa sat up slowly, her head pounding. "Like I was hit by a transport shuttle. What happened?" "You were defeated in single combat," Wexter replied carefully, "by a 73-year-old human wearing what I believe are called flip-flops." Thysa stared at him. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She looked around the medical bay, noting the concerned faces of the medical staff, the diagnostic equipment that was apparently finding nothing wrong with her except a mild concussion, and the viewing screen that was playing back footage of the fight on continuous loop. On the screen, she watched herself charge at Owen with all the fury and skill of her centuries of training. She watched him sidestep her attacks like he was avoiding raindrops. She watched him knock her unconscious with casual precision, using footwear that probably cost less than her breakfast. "Play it again," she whispered. The medical staff exchanged glances. "Commander, perhaps you should rest." "Play it again." They played it again, and again. And 17 more times after that. Each viewing made it worse. Owen wasn't lucky. He wasn't using some unknown alien combat technique. He was simply better at fighting than she was, despite being a fraction of her size, a fraction of her age, and a member of a species she'd never considered worthy of attention. "How is this possible?" she asked finally. Dr. Wexter had been wondering the same thing. "We've run every scan available. Physically, he appears to be exactly what he claims to be. An elderly human male with slightly elevated blood pressure and what appears to be an old knee injury. No cybernetic enhancements. No genetic modifications. No chemical stimulants. He's just human." Thysa closed her eyes. "Send a message to the Draken High Command. Tell them we need to reassess our intelligence on Earth immediately." What should I tell them about the tournament? Tell them the truth. Tell them we lost to a 73-year-old in flip-flops who was more concerned about finding a trash can than winning a fight. She paused, watching Owen on the screen as he checked her pulse after knocking her unconscious. "And tell them he asked if I needed water." The implications of that simple gesture, showing concern for a defeated opponent, were perhaps more terrifying than the combat skills themselves. It suggested a level of confidence that bordered on the incomprehensible. You don't offer water to someone you're afraid of. You don't show mercy to someone who might recover and attack you again. You don't display casual kindness in the middle of what was supposed to be a battle to the death unless you're absolutely certain that the fight was never really in question. Owen Fletcher hadn't just defeated the greatest warrior of the Draken Empire. He'd done it so easily that he'd had time to worry about her well-being afterward. As the medical bay bustled with activity around her, Thysa realized that everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about humanity was wrong. And if they were wrong about this one old man in flip-flops, what else were they wrong about? The emergency meeting convened 36 minutes after Owen left the arena. Gorvak had never seen the Galactic Council chambers fill this quickly, with representatives from 43 different species materializing through various forms of faster-than-light communication. Some appeared as holograms, others as quantum consciousness projections, and a few had actually broken light-speed travel records to attend in person. Owen sat in what had hastily been designated as Earth's official diplomatic chair, still wearing his flip-flops and now sipping what appeared to be coffee from a thermos he'd produced from somewhere in his cargo shorts. Kira sat beside him, frantically scrolling through her diplomatic protocols handbook and finding absolutely nothing that covered this situation. "This is unprecedented," declared High Chancellor Urvek of the Zentaran Collective, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated energy patterns. "In 15,000 years of galactic civilization, we have never witnessed such a complete tactical miscalculation." Owen looked up from his coffee. "Miscalculation about what?" The chamber fell silent. 43 species stared at the human who apparently didn't understand that he'd just shattered every assumption about combat effectiveness that had governed interstellar politics for millennia. Kelthon leaned forward, his 6 tentacles writhing in what passed for nervous fidgeting among his people. "Mr. Fletcher, you do realize that Commander Thysa was considered the most formidable individual combatant in known space?" "Oh, her! Yeah, she seemed nice. Good form on the initial charge. Bit predictable after that, but solid fundamentals. Owen took another sip of coffee. You folks want some? I brought extra. Gorvak's chitinous plates clicked together rapidly, a sound his species made when experiencing severe cognitive dissonance. You defeated her with footwear. Well, technically, yeah, but it's not really about the shoes. Owen set down his thermos and looked around the chamber with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. It's about understanding distance, timing, and leverage. Plus, she telegraphed her attacks pretty clearly. Probably never fought anyone who didn't try to match her strength for strength. Ambassador Delvira of the Vorthak Empire, a species known for their strategic analysis capabilities, activated her translation matrix. Explain telegraphing attacks. Owen stood up and demonstrated a slow-motion version of Thysa's charging technique. See, she drops her shoulder here, shifts her weight here, and commits fully to the forward momentum here. Once she's in motion, she's locked into that trajectory for at least 2 full seconds. That's plenty of time to get out of the way and position for a counter. He sat back down and retrieved his coffee. Basic physics, really. Object in motion stays in motion until it hits something harder than it is. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several species simultaneously accessing their databases on human physical capabilities, educational systems, and historical combat records. Dr. Selvara of the Nexari Medical Collective materialized as a holographic projection, her multiple eyes blinking in sequence. Our analysis of the combat footage indicates that your movements were not enhanced by any technology we can detect. Your reaction time, while impressive for your species, falls within normal human parameters. Yet you defeated an opponent with reaction times 847% faster than yours. Speed isn't everything, Owen replied. She was faster, sure, but she was also predictable, and she'd never fought anyone who prioritized efficiency over intimidation. Faye, who had remained quiet during most of the proceedings, finally spoke up. If I may address the council, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here about human combat philosophy. Please proceed, Gorvak said, though his attention remained fixed on Owen, who was now examining what appeared to be a granola bar he'd retrieved from another pocket. Most species develop combat techniques based on their natural advantages, Faye explained. The Draken emphasize strength and armor, the Nexari use speed and precision, the Quilarians rely on overwhelming force, but humans developed combat techniques specifically designed to overcome superior opponents. She activated a holographic display showing various human martial arts forms throughout history. We've spent thousands of years figuring out how to defeat enemies who are bigger, stronger, faster, and better armed than we are. It's not about matching their advantages, it's about making their advantages irrelevant. Owen nodded approvingly while unwrapping his granola bar. Pretty much, yeah. You don't arm wrestle a gorilla, you don't try to outrun a cheetah, and you definitely don't try to tank hits from someone wearing natural armor. Chancellor Gavrim of the Hegemony, a species whose military doctrine had remained unchanged for 12,000 years, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. You're claiming that your entire species specializes in asymmetric warfare. Not specializes, Owen corrected. It's just how we think about problems. If something's bigger than you, find a way around it. If it's stronger than you, use its strength against it. If it's faster than you, make speed irrelevant. He took a bite of his granola bar and chewed thoughtfully. We're persistence hunters by evolution. We don't catch prey by being faster or stronger. We catch it by being smarter and more stubborn. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like a shock wave. Several representatives began urgent communications with their respective military commands. Thysa herself entered the chamber at that moment, moving carefully but apparently fully recovered. She'd insisted on attending despite medical recommendations, and now stood before the assembled council with her scales still bearing the faint marks where Owen's flip-flops had made contact. Honored Council, she began, her voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence. I formally request permission to address the combat analysis. Gorvak gestured for her to proceed, though his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. I have reviewed the combat footage 247 times, Thysa continued. I have consulted with our finest military strategists, our most advanced combat simulators, and our historical databases spanning 50,000 years of warfare. She paused, looking directly at Owen. In every simulation, assuming identical starting conditions, I win that fight, every single time. Owen looked up from his granola bar with genuine interest. Really? How'd you set up the simulations? Standard combat parameters. 2 opponents, equal starting distance, no weapons except natural capabilities and improvised items. The simulation runs through every possible sequence of attacks, counters, and movements. Thessa's claws extended slightly, an unconscious response to stress. According to our mathematics, my victory probability was 99.97%. Huh, Owen said thoughtfully. Did you program the simulation to account for the possibility that I might not fight back the way you expected? Thysa blinked, a gesture that took several seconds given the complexity of her eyelid structure. What do you mean? Well, did you tell the computer that I'd try to match your strength, trade blows directly, engage in traditional combat techniques? Owen finished his granola bar and crumpled the wrapper, once again looking around for a proper disposal method before pocketing it. Because if you did, then yeah, you'd win every time. I would too, if I fought that way. The chamber erupted into dozens of simultaneous conversations as the full implications became clear. Every major military power in the galaxy had spent centuries developing combat doctrines based on the assumption that all sentient species would approach warfare according to predictable patterns. Dr. Wexter, who had joined the session remotely from the medical bay, projected a new set of data into the chamber's central display. We've completed our analysis of Mr. Fletcher's physiological readings during the combat. His heart rate peaked at 94 beats per minute. His stress hormones remained within normal ranges. His neural activity suggested a state of relaxed focus rather than combat readiness. What does that mean? Asked Ambassador Nexira of the Outer Colonies. It means, Wexter said slowly, that from a biological standpoint, he was never actually in a fight. His body never activated combat stress responses because he never perceived Commander Thissa as a genuine threat. The silence that followed was deafening. Owen raised his hand again. Can I ask a question? How many of your species have actually fought humans before? The lack of response was answer enough. Right. So you've been making assumptions based on theoretical models and indirect observations. Owen looked around the chamber with something approaching sympathy. That's like trying to figure out how to swim by reading about water. Kira finally found her voice. Owen, I think what the Council is trying to understand is whether your abilities are representative of humans in general or if you're exceptional. Owen considered this seriously. Well, I'm definitely not the best fighter humanity has to offer. I'm 73, I've got arthritis in my left knee, and I haven't been in an actual fight since my Navy days. But I do teach self-defense classes at the community center, so I stay in practice. He pulled out his phone and showed them a picture of what appeared to be a dozen elderly humans in a gym, all wearing casual exercise clothing and practicing various defensive techniques. That's my intermediate class. Average age is probably 68. Most of them could have handled Commander Thissa about as well as I did, though maybe not quite as quickly. He scrolled to another picture. This is my beginner's class. They're still working on basic footwork and timing, but give them another few months and they'd be dangerous too. Gorvax stared at the images with growing horror. Those are elderly humans. Yeah, retirement community stays pretty active. Keeps us out of trouble. Owen put his phone away. The younger folks, the ones in their prime, they're scary good. Military training, competitive athletics, martial arts from dozens of different traditions. I wouldn't want to fight any of them. Chancellor Gavrim's voice carried a tremor of something that might have been fear. How many humans are trained in combat techniques? Owen scratched his head thoughtfully. Define trained. Like formal military service. Maybe 200 million active and reserve worldwide, plus veterans. Martial arts as a hobby? Probably another 500 million or so. Self-defense classes, sports fighting, recreational combat training? He shrugged. Most of us pick up something along the way. It's just practical. The mathematics were staggering. Earth's population was approximately 8.2 billion humans. If Owen's estimates were accurate, roughly 10% had formal combat training, and an unknown percentage of the remainder had informal experience. What about your military forces? Kelthan asked, though he seemed to already dread the answer. Oh, you don't want to fight them, Owen said with absolute certainty. Professional soldiers are a whole different category. They train constantly, use actual weapons, and fight as coordinated units. Plus, they're usually younger and in much better shape than I am. He finished his coffee and screwed the cap back onto his thermos. But honestly, if it ever came to actual warfare, you probably wouldn't face our military first. What do you mean? Thysa asked. Well, if someone invaded Earth, they'd have to get through about 2 billion civilians who own personal weapons and know how to use them before they ever reached our actual army. And those civilians would be fighting on their home territory, using tactics developed specifically for asymmetric resistance warfare. Owen looked around the chamber with mild confusion, as if he couldn't understand why this wasn't obvious. Why would anyone willingly fight humans on our own planet? The emergency session continued for 6 more hours, but the real conversation had ended the moment Owen described Earth's civilian population as a military obstacle. In the end, 3 major galactic powers quietly began revising their expansion plans to avoid Sol System entirely, and Owen Fletcher went back to his hotel room to call his wife and tell her about his day. Admiral Carveth of the Nexari Deep Space Command received the priority transmission while reviewing patrol reports from the Outer Rim territories. The message header indicated it was from the Galactic Council emergency session, marked with the highest possible security classification. She expected routine diplomatic updates, trade negotiations, or perhaps another border dispute requiring mediation. What she found instead made her immediately cancel all other appointments for the next 72 hours. The footage of Owen Fletcher defeating Commander Thysa had been transmitted to every major military installation in known space within 6 hours of the council session's conclusion. Along with it came detailed analysis reports, physiological data, and what could only be described as a complete reassessment of humanity's threat potential. Carveth watched the combat sequence 17 times before calling her senior staff. "How quickly can we reposition the Third Fleet away from the Sol System?" she asked without preamble. Commander Selvog, her strategic operations chief, consulted his tactical displays. "Current deployment has us 4.2 light-years from Earth. We could be at minimum safe distance within 8 standard rotations, but Admiral, our mission parameters specifically require us to maintain surveillance." "New mission parameters," Carveth interrupted. "Establish a monitoring perimeter at 15 light-years minimum distance. Passive sensors only. No active scanning of the system under any circumstances." The bridge crew exchanged glances. In 300 years of Nexari military history, they had never retreated from a surveillance mission against a species classified as primitive and non-threatening. "Admiral," Selvog ventured carefully, "are we officially reclassifying humanity?" Carveth looked at the tactical display showing their current position relative to Earth. 4.2 light-years had seemed like a comfortable distance when monitoring a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Now it felt like they were practically in Earth's backyard. "Reclassify them as Category Omega," she said finally. "Full quarantine protocols. No direct contact without unanimous council approval and a minimum of 12 allied species providing military support." The silence on the bridge was absolute. Category Omega was reserved for species capable of causing galactic-level extinction events. It had been used exactly twice in recorded history, both times for civilizations that had developed reality-warping weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in the command centers of every major military power. Fleet Admiral Dravos of the Quilarian War Council had been in the middle of approving expansion plans into previously unexplored sectors when the transmission arrived. The Quilarians had spent the last 50 years systematically cataloguing every habitable world within 100 light-years of their borders, preparing for the next phase of their territorial expansion. Earth had been on the list. After watching Owen Fletcher's casual dismantling of what they'd considered the galaxy's premier individual combatant, Dravos personally struck Sol System from their expansion database and issued orders that it be marked as permanently off-limits. "Sir," his aide questioned, "the planet shows abundant resources and appears to have a relatively small population by our standards. Are we certain we want to abandon potential colonization?" Dravos looked at him with the expression usually reserved for subordinates who suggested attacking black holes. "Let me ask you something, Commander. If that elderly human in casual footwear represents their civilian population, what do you imagine their actual military forces are capable of?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. On Nexus Station, Dr. Selvara had spent the past 18 hours running computational models based on the limited data available about human society. The results were disturbing enough that she'd requested a direct conference with the Galactic Council's Xenobiological Research Division. The pattern analysis is conclusive, she reported to the assembled scientists. Humanity appears to be unique among known sapient species in that they've developed combat effectiveness as a survival trait rather than a social dominance mechanism. Dr. Thiller of the Draken Science Collective activated her holographic interface. Elaborate on this distinction. Selvara projected a comparative analysis showing combat development across different species. Most sapient races develop fighting abilities to establish hierarchy within their own populations. The strongest lead, the weakest follow. Combat serves a social function, but humans seem to have developed their abilities specifically to overcome external threats that were superior to them in every measurable way. The implications were staggering. While other species had evolved combat techniques to fight equals or establish dominance over their own kind, humans had apparently spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to defeat opponents who were bigger, stronger, faster, and better equipped than they were. Consider their historical records, Selvara continued. They've documented thousands of years of warfare, but not primarily against other humans of equal capability. They fought predators, environmental challenges, and resource scarcity. They developed tactics assuming they would always be the underdog. Dr. Gavran, a Zentaran military theorist, interjected with obvious concern. Are you suggesting that humans have evolved specifically to defeat superior opponents? I'm suggesting, Selvara replied carefully, that humans have evolved assuming that most opponents will be superior to them in raw capability. Their entire approach to conflict resolution is based on overcoming disadvantages through tactical innovation. The research team spent the next several hours reviewing every available piece of data about human society, history, and cultural development. What they found painted a picture that no one had anticipated. Humans had independently developed dozens of different martial arts systems, each designed around different principles of using an opponent's strength against them. They'd created entire philosophical frameworks centered on the idea that technique could overcome raw power. Their military history showed a consistent pattern of smaller, supposedly weaker forces defeating larger, better-equipped enemies through superior strategy and tactics. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to treat this as normal. Back on Earth, Owen Fletcher was completely unaware that his casual demonstration had triggered a galaxy-wide military crisis. He was sitting in his hotel room, video calling his wife back home. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, though the connection quality made her image flicker slightly. "Oh, you know, the usual. Met some nice aliens, had a little sparring match, talked about self-defense techniques. Pretty standard diplomatic stuff." Owen adjusted his phone to get better reception. "Should be home by the weekend. How are things at the community center?" "Well, your self-defense class has a waiting list now. Apparently word got out that you were representing Earth in some kind of official capacity. And now everyone wants to learn what you've been teaching." Owen looked puzzled. "That's odd. I just teach basic stuff. Nothing fancy." What Owen didn't know was that his basic stuff had been analyzed by the finest military minds in the galaxy and found to be more effective than combat techniques that had been developed over centuries by species specifically bred for warfare. 3 hours later, Ambassador Kira received a priority communication from Earth's government requesting immediate clarification on humanity's status within galactic society. Apparently, several major galactic powers had simultaneously cancelled trade negotiations, withdrawn diplomatic missions, and begun implementing what could only be described as quarantine protocols around Earth's solar system. "What did you tell them?" she asked Owen, who was reading what appeared to be a tourism brochure about local attractions. "Just answered their questions honestly. They wanted to know about human combat capabilities, so I explained about persistence hunting and asymmetric tactics. Basic stuff about not trying to outmuscle something stronger than you." Owen looked up from his brochure. "Why? Did I say something wrong?" Kira showed him the latest diplomatic communications, which included formal requests from multiple species for mutual non-aggression pacts and guaranteed territorial sovereignty agreements. Several messages specifically mentioned respect for humanity's sphere of influence and acknowledgement of Earth's defensive capabilities. Owen read through the messages with growing confusion. "They think we're threatening them?" "Owen, You just demonstrated that a 73-year-old human civilian can casually defeat the greatest warrior in known space. From their perspective, that makes Earth's entire population a potential military threat. Owen considered this seriously. But I wasn't threatening anyone. I was just defending myself, and I made sure she was okay afterward. That might actually make it worse. How? Kira pulled up the tactical analyses that had been flooding her communication channels. They're interpreting your restraint as evidence of overwhelming confidence. The fact that you showed concern for Thissa's well-being after defeating her suggests that you never considered her a real threat to begin with. Owen scratched his head. Well, she wasn't really. I mean, she was impressive and all, but she'd never fought anyone who wasn't trying to match her strength. It was like watching someone who'd only ever played chess against computers try to play against a human for the first time. That's exactly what scares them, Kira said. They've just realized that their entire understanding of combat effectiveness might be fundamentally flawed. As if to confirm her point, another priority message arrived. This one was from the Galactic Council itself, formally requesting that Earth provide detailed information about its defensive capabilities and military doctrine. The request was phrased in the diplomatic language used when addressing potential peer-level civilizations. 24 hours earlier, humanity had been classified as a minor species barely worth monitoring. Now they were being treated as a major galactic power whose intentions needed to be carefully managed. And it had all started with an old man in flip-flops who just wanted to make sure his opponent was okay after a fight. Owen finished reading the diplomatic messages and looked at Kira with genuine bewilderment. Should I apologize to them or something? I really wasn't trying to cause any trouble. The fact that humanity's inadvertent rise to galactic prominence had been accomplished by someone who was now worried about hurting people's feelings was, Kira reflected, perhaps the most human thing of all. 6 months after what galactic historians would later call the flip-flop incident, the transformation of interstellar politics was complete. The Galactic Council had relocated its primary meeting chambers to a space station positioned exactly 23.7 light-years from Earth, far enough to demonstrate respectful caution, close enough to maintain diplomatic relations. Owen Fletcher remained blissfully unaware that his name had become synonymous with humanity's accidental ascension to superpower status. He was back home, teaching his regular self-defense class at the Pine Valley Community Center, helping Mrs. Rodriguez work on her footwork and reminding everyone to stay hydrated. Remember, he told the class of 16 seniors, all wearing comfortable sneakers and determined expressions, it's not about being stronger than your opponent. It's about understanding leverage, timing, and physics. Even the biggest threat becomes manageable if you approach it correctly. What Owen's students didn't know was that their gentle instructor's casual wisdom had triggered the largest military restructuring in galactic history. Admiral Carveth stood before the assembled commanders of the Nexari Deep Space Fleet, addressing what had become known as the Earth problem. The holographic display behind her showed the current defensive perimeter, a careful arrangement of monitoring stations, all positioned at what their xenobiologists had determined to be respectfully non-threatening distances from Sol system. Intelligence reports confirm that human military doctrine is based entirely on asymmetric warfare principles, she announced to the gathered officers. Their entire civilization appears to have developed under the assumption that they would always be fighting superior opponents. Commander Selvok raised a tentacle. Admiral, our analysis suggests their current population includes approximately 200 million individuals with formal military training. Should we be concerned about potential expansion? Carveth looked at him with something approaching pity. Commander, our analysis also suggests that their idea of formal military training involves learning to defeat opponents using improvised weapons and environmental advantages. Their civilian population practices combat techniques as recreational activities. The implications hung in the air like a dark nebula. While other species had developed specialized warrior castes, humans had apparently made basic combat competency a cultural norm. What are our current rules of engagement if we encounter human vessels? Asked Fleet Captain Nexira. Under no circumstances are you to approach closer than 10,000 kilometers to any human ship. If they attempt communication, you will respond politely and offer whatever assistance they require. If they seem lost, you will provide navigation data to help them return to Earth immediately. Carveth's expression was grimmer than anyone had ever seen it. And if they ask questions about our military capabilities, you will answer honestly and completely. The last instruction caused a ripple of shock through the assembled officers. The Nexari had never voluntarily shared classified military information with any species. Admiral, Selvok ventured carefully, are those orders based on diplomatic protocols or tactical assessment? Tactical, Kaveth replied without hesitation. If humans are naturally inclined toward asymmetric warfare, then providing them with accurate information about our capabilities prevents them from making worst-case assumptions about our intentions. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that humans who felt threatened might develop countermeasures based on overestimating Nexari military strength. Given their apparent talent for defeating superior opponents, this could result in weapons systems capable of eliminating threats that didn't actually exist. Nobody wanted to find out what humans could accomplish when they put their minds to serious military innovation. Meanwhile, in the Draken Empire's war colleges, military doctrine was being completely rewritten. Commander Thissa had been promoted to Strategic Analysis Director, a position created specifically to study what they now called human combat philosophy. Her first official report had been distributed throughout the Empire's military hierarchy with the highest possible classification level. The conclusions were disturbing enough that several generals had requested early retirement rather than attempt to adapt their tactics to account for human unpredictability. Traditional combat assumes both opponents will attempt to maximize their advantages. Thissa explained to a room full of the Empire's finest military minds. Strength fights strength, speed fights speed, technology fights technology. But humans appear to approach combat by deliberately avoiding direct competition in areas where their opponents are superior. General Gavrim, a veteran of 43 major campaigns, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. You're suggesting they deliberately choose not to use their best capabilities? I'm suggesting, Thissa replied carefully, that they've redefined what best capabilities means. Instead of maximizing raw power, they maximize effectiveness. Instead of overwhelming opponents, they make opposition irrelevant. She activated a holographic demonstration showing the combat footage that had changed everything. Watch carefully. At no point does Fletcher attempt to match my strength, speed, or defensive capabilities. Instead, he eliminates the relevance of those advantages by controlling distance, timing, and positioning. The footage played again, showing Owen's casual sidestepping and his precise flip-flop strikes. To military minds trained in traditional combat doctrine, it looked like magic. The weaker opponent had somehow made the stronger opponent's advantages meaningless. How do we defend against tactics like this? Asked General Wexter. Thissa had been dreading this question for months. Our analysis suggests that traditional defense assumes your opponent will attack your strengths in predictable ways. Human tactics appear designed to bypass strong defenses by attacking weaknesses you didn't know existed. The silence that followed was profound. The Draken Empire had conquered 17 star systems using overwhelming force and superior firepower. Their entire military philosophy was based on being stronger and better equipped than their enemies. Recommendation, Gavrim asked finally. Avoid conflict with humans at all costs, Thissa said without hesitation. If conflict becomes unavoidable, do not attempt to fight them according to traditional protocols. And under no circumstances should we assume that superior numbers or technology will provide a decisive advantage. Similar conversations were taking place across the galaxy. Military academies revised their curricula to include courses on asymmetric threat assessment. Defense contractors began developing weapon systems designed not to overpower enemies, but to eliminate the effectiveness of superior opponents. Trade guilds started offering hazard pay for any routes that passed through Sol System's general vicinity. The economic implications were staggering. Humanity had inadvertently created a 20-light-year radius of space where normal interstellar commerce operated under entirely different rules. Ships traveled farther to avoid the area. Insurance rates skyrocketed for any cargo bound for Earth. Diplomatic missions required approval from multiple galactic authorities, and Earth itself remained completely unaware of the chaos they'd caused. Dr. Selvara published her final report on human society after 8 months of intensive research. The document, classified at the highest possible level, painted a picture that no one in the galactic community had been prepared for. Human civilization has developed under unique evolutionary pressures, she wrote. Unlike most sapient species, they achieved dominance on their homeworld not through superior individual capabilities, but through collaborative problem-solving and tactical innovation. Their entire culture is built around the assumption that any challenge can be overcome through sufficient creativity and persistence. The report detailed humanity's approach to obstacles. Instead of accepting limitations, they engineered solutions. Instead of avoiding stronger opponents, they developed techniques to defeat them. Instead of competing in areas where they were disadvantaged, they changed the rules of competition entirely. Most critically, the report concluded, humans appear to view warfare not as a contest of strength, but as a problem to be solved. Their military history suggests they approach each conflict by analyzing their opponent's advantages and developing specific countermeasures designed to neutralize those advantages. The final section of the report contained a single recommendation that would reshape galactic policy for generations. Under no circumstances should any galactic civilization provide humans with detailed information about their military capabilities, territorial ambitions, or strategic resources. Humans appear to treat superior opponents as engineering challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. Back on Earth, Owen Fletcher was helping his neighbor fix a broken fence post, completely unaware that his casual demonstration of human problem-solving had been analyzed by xenobiologists across 36 star systems. "The trick," he explained to his neighbor while improvising a temporary support using a garden hose and some old fence wire, "is not to fight the problem directly. The post is broken, but the fence itself is still solid, so we work around the break instead of trying to force it back together." His neighbor nodded appreciatively as the improvised repair held firm. "You always know how to make things work, Owen. Where'd you learn to think like that?" Owen shrugged while cleaning his hands on an old rag. "Just seems like common sense. Every problem has a solution if you look at it from the right angle." 6 months later, the Galactic Council established the Sol Accords, a comprehensive treaty recognizing Earth as a sovereign system with full territorial rights extending to a radius of 50 light-years. The treaty included provisions for non-interference, mutual respect, and guaranteed safe passage for human vessels throughout galactic space. Most importantly, it included a clause specifically stating that no signatory species would attempt to test human defensive capabilities under any circumstances. The treaty was signed by representatives of 847 different civilizations, making it the most widely supported diplomatic agreement in galactic history. Owen Fletcher was invited to attend the signing ceremony as Earth's honorary representative. He declined politely, explaining that he had promised to help coach his granddaughter's soccer team that weekend. The galaxy's most feared accidental superpower was teaching 8-year-olds how to work together and solve problems through persistence and creativity. Nobody was surprised when those kids went undefeated for the entire season. 3 years after the signing of the Sol Accords, interstellar politics had settled into what historians would later call the peaceful period. Trade flourished, diplomatic relations improved, and military conflicts decreased dramatically across known space. It wasn't that warfare had become impossible, it was that every species had realized they had no idea what other civilizations might be capable of if properly motivated. The human approach to conflict resolution, analyzing problems and developing innovative solutions, had become the standard model for interstellar diplomacy. Instead of threatening each other with superior force, species began sharing technological innovations and collaborative problem-solving techniques. Owen Fletcher, now 76 and still teaching self-defense classes every week, received a letter from the Galactic Council thanking him for his inadvertent contribution to galactic peace. He read it twice, scratched his head, and showed it to his wife. "I think they're thanking me for that sparring match I had a few years ago," he said, sounding puzzled. "Seems like an awful lot of fuss over a simple demonstration." His wife patted his arm affectionately. "You always did have a talent for helping people see things differently, dear." Outside their kitchen window, a small monitoring satellite maintained its respectful distance, dutifully recording that Earth's most dangerous citizen was still primarily concerned with helping his neighbors and teaching practical life skills to anyone who wanted to learn. The galaxy slept peacefully, knowing that humanity's greatest weapon was apparently an elderly man who treated every challenge as an opportunity to help someone and every opponent as a person who just needed to understand a different perspective. And in the end, that was the most terrifying realization of all.